Hey everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of the Cradle News Roundup. I'm Sima Itayim, and I am the head of social media at the Cradle. I'm joined by Sharmeen Narwani, who's editor and columnist for the Cradle, as well as Karim Shami, content creator and writer for the Cradle. If you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Telegram, and if you haven't already checked out our Patreon and become a subscriber, please do so. We need your support, and in order to bring you more like this, we need you to do your part so we can bring you more. So, before we get into the latest developments out of Gaza and West Asia in general, because there's a lot to unpack, we want to start with something big that happened yesterday. So, Ukraine has pulled off one of its most ambitious strikes yet, I think, targeting multiple Russian air bases. And not just near the border, actually. Some of those bases were hit deep inside Russia. And they reportedly used over 100 drones launched from inside Russian territory. And they managed to destroy dozens of military planes, actually, some of them Russia's long-range bombers. I think it's a serious escalation, and it says a lot about where things are headed. So, guys, if you would do us the honors of breaking down what happened, some of what happened at least for us.
Yesterday, Ukraine launched a major drone strike deep inside Russian territory, targeting 5 Russian air bases. The bases that were targeted were in areas within 3 time zones. This tells us how huge the strike was. The attack occurred in the early morning and is considered the most damaging strike against Russia to date. According to Russian reports, 117 drones hidden inside trucks inside the Russian territory were used. The trucks were hidden near or were parked near the air bases, and when the time came for the operation, the top of the trucks opened and many drones, they are saying up to 117 drones flew to their targets. The drones were able to damage or destroy over 40 Russian aircraft, including Tu-95 and Tu-22 bombers and one A-50 radar planes. So the Tu-95 and Tu-22M are strategic bombers for Russia. The Tu-95s are used since like 50 years, and the new model is Tu-22, is also used to launch huge attacks, usually against Ukraine. They carry heavy bombs or glider bombs or any heavy missile that is produced by Russia. The Ukrainian army estimated that around 34% of Russia's strategic bomber fleet was destroyed, and that the losses reached up to $7 billion. And by the way, one of the bases were over 4,000 kilometers or 2,600 miles away from the Russia-Ukraine border. That tells us how deep the operation was.
Look, I think, we're all getting the facts coming out. We might have the Russians refute some of the details, sort of in the Pakistan India conflict. We had so many planes were hit, and then the number was reduced, and then other data came in. So I think we wait to watch this. I think there's several things interesting on the political front and the backdrop to which yesterday's operation happened, which is significant. First of all, Zelensky is all over social media proclaiming some kind of victory over Russia, calling this a brilliant military operation and crediting himself for having spent over a year and a half planning, organizing every detail in this operation. Now, this is Zelensky. He's been busy visiting every Western and non-Western capital that will see him with his begging cup out in the last year and a half. This is not someone who we can imagine being involved in. He's not even a military man. Okay, for starters, he's a comedian and an actor in his background. So, okay, he wants to give himself credit. That's fine. But, here's the thing. First of all, I think we should watch what he says. Okay. And then we have that clip. Okay. So, first of all, I think we have to watch a bit of what he says and the backslapping that's going on.
Вражено 34% стратегічних носіїв крилатих ракет на аеродромах базування. Діяли наші люди на території різних російських регіонів в 3 часових поясах.
Okay, so now I think what's important about this is that he's taking credit openly. He seems to think, and we've seen this various times in the conflict with Ukraine, where the West thinks they've scored a victory and they do very public victory laps. And then, of course, you know, time passes and the Russians emerge as the stronger player. This is very clear. This is kind of why, you know, I think Westerners have tired of this war. It's a money pit for them. It's very clear that the Russians can't, the Ukrainians can't even get enough conscripts for the army. They're like kidnapping men of military age off the street. It's very clear Russia is in ascendance here. So why is this happening now? In context, last week we reported about a possible assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin when he was in Kursk, visiting his chopper had taken him to Kursk. And that was the morning, May 20th, when there was a massive Ukrainian drone and missile attack on the Kursk region. And, you know, the Russians came out days later and admitted that the president's helicopter had been there at the time. And the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, came out and said something very unusual, in which he almost seemed to exonerate Trump and suggest that it was the neocons in his cabinet and around him in Washington, D.C., who were staging these intel operations, basically helping the Ukraine stage these 11th hour attacks of this magnitude, okay, before peace talks, because they want to scuttle peace talks. They don't want the U.S. to leave the Ukrainian military theater. Europe needs them. And that was interesting because it's a Russian foreign minister right after what was shown to be, you know, very likely a U.S. intel-backed Ukrainian attack on Russian soil. Because as the Cradle noted, there were reports on the morning of May 20th that there was a lot of ferocious activity of U.S. surveillance aircraft and systems in the Ukrainian Crimea area, enough to be noted. So I think this brings us around to what's happening now. And the question then and the question now is, did Trump know about this? Now, there were early reports saying Trump did, and then Axios corrected their own article on the subject, which wrongly stated that Ukraine notified the Trump administration of the drone strike in Russia to quote unquote did not notify, which aligns with official reports. Now, some of you can believe that Trump did know about this. Others can believe that Trump didn't know about this. The interesting thing for us is because we at the Cradle have really noted a divergence of views in the United States, MAGA versus Neocon, or whatever you want to call it. And for sure, if the Russians are suggesting that Trump did not know about this, and don't forget, Trump is the U.S. president who said, I can sort out the Ukraine crisis and end the war in 24 hours when he came into the White House. Every effort has been made to, you know, create obstacles to any peaceful solution, to any resolution of the conflict. And the attack, the massive attack by Ukraine yesterday, again, the Russians are suggesting national intelligence agencies were involved in this, all right, is very likely to be intended to scuttle talks in Istanbul scheduled for today. Now, when this happened, Karim, you noted that you know, the Russians had an opportunity to just cancel their attendance at the peace talks in Istanbul, but Lavrov, the foreign minister, came out and said, no, we're going to go. And you thought that was weird.
Weird because this shows that Russia is very weak.
See, I don't think so. I think, and this is the thing, I think this is clearly these kind of attacks suddenly out of nowhere. Okay, May 20th, massive Ukrainian drone and missile attack on Russian territory. And then last night, something quite extraordinary, right? To ruin chances of peace being advanced is really specifically intended to make Russians bail from at least today's talks. Okay. And if they bail, that derails talks for the foreseeable future, right? And then likely there'll be a Russian retaliation, which will, the Western capitals and Western headlines will scream about the murderous Russian retaliation, and that will derail talks further, and so on and so forth. So Lavrov stepped up saying, we have full confidence. We're going to nail you at these things, okay? Because imagine that the representatives of the on the American side in Istanbul are taking orders from Trump. I mean, Trump might just lay it on thick to the Ukrainians, seeing that they did something to derail and the peace talks. Now, Trump is being besieged on many sides, so it's not just these negotiations over Ukraine, but it's negotiations over Gaza. And he has seen that the Israelis and and their friends on the Gaza negotiations, and the Ukrainians and their European allies and U.S. neocons in his own party, no less, are trying to sabotage those negotiations. He's now seen this, and we know he's seen this because of the kind of people he's fired in his administration as of late. I mean, Mike Waltz got completely sidelined because he colluded with Netanyahu, a foreign prime minister, to put pressure on Trump to strike Iran, right? And now we're hearing Morgan Ortagus, Trump's envoy to the region and to Lebanon also specifically, is going to be forced to resign. But not only is she going to be forced to resign, so are several others in his administration. Key to them, and this is reported by Israel's Channel 4, I think yesterday or today, that two National Security Council officials, Merav Seren and Eric Traeger, have also been recently removed from their positions. Traeger was overseeing, West Asia and North African affairs at the National Security Council, whereas Seren was the director for Iran. And check this out, Seren previously worked with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, and he's affiliated with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD, which is an extremely pro-Israel, hawkish think tank based in Washington, which has been pushing war against Iran, and wants to scuttle Trump's nuclear talks with the Islamic Republic. Israel's Channel 14 says the decision is partly an effort to restructure the NSC, and partly to reduce its influence and transfer foreign policy to a limited group of trusted Trump officials. So this means, again, who Trump trusts are those who are not trying to do what happened to him with almost all his major appointees during his first administration. They turned out to be straight out neocons. They didn't have any MAGA agenda. They were part of the swamp, etc. So now, Trump will rejig that, but he's now, and this is over the middle, just West Asia, right? He's going to now have to put a microscope over his various selected officials who are running the Ukraine talks and running Ukraine policy for his White House, because the efforts to completely sabotage any progress on that front is full on. Now, I know some of you will say, no, this is Trump's way of playing bad cop, good cop. I really don't see that. I really don't see that. We saw in his first administration how, which, information that came out later in major U.S. media, that both the Pentagon, his various intelligence agencies had kept information from Trump during his administration, and had even refused to follow out orders. Not that he knew, they just didn't follow through with directives that they had been given. And I think we're seeing this now. The neocon / neoliberal hold on Washington's foreign policy, its entrenchment with really, really frightening players in the world, the forever war players like the United Kingdom, like Israel, are absolute. There's no there's no loyalty to the U.S. and its interests. They're the forever war crowd. And so what Trump has been trying to do in order to get not the Gaza ceasefire, but the Iran-U.S. nuclear talks underway, again, being ambushed at every opportunity, he's now going to have to do with Ukraine. Otherwise, for sure, Vladimir Putin will immediately understand that Trump is not serious about talks.
Well, I mean, the one thing I just want to say, so Karim sees it as a sign of weakness to continue going to the Istanbul talks. Others, like you mentioned, Charmine, say that, this is just a decision to not take the bait, right? By going, because Zelensky, well, to derail the talks, because Zelensky has not been very cooperative.
But if Russia has the upper hand as she's the stronger one now, why should they care about the talks if they
Well, they could go to the
occupy-
talks and retaliate, right?
They did retaliate. I see it as a sign of weakness. They destroyed very strategic weapons. They didn't destroy like a tank or like a gas storage as usually they do. They destroyed one of the most sophisticated airplanes in the world, and one of the airplanes which is the T-90-95. Russia, they love this airplane, and they have it since like 50-60 years. And
We're talking about statecraft. We're not talking about ego. I mean, the
If you-
Americans are like ego players, and
Russians
the
are ego
Russians, the
players
Chinese,
also.
and Iranians. No, I'm not saying they don't have national pride. I'm saying they understand statecraft deeply and historically. And I really think that Lavrov's game is to show up at these talks, to show the Ukrainian you're not going to be able to achieve your goal. That's what Hezbollah did with the Israelis in this war. They knew that Lebanon was taking hits and they were taking hits, but they said our goal is to stop you from achieving your goals.
But
And that is a
Israel
strategy.
achieved everything they want in Lebanon.
No, they
Everything.
wait. I'm
And-
talking
and-
pre-ceasefire.
Okay.
They were unable to do what they wanted in the land.
They
to
assassinated Sayyid
occupy.
Hassan.
I'm not talking about Karim. I'm naming now. I'm now naming the things they weren't able to achieve during the war, which was they were unable to penetrate Lebanese territory for months on end from the ground. They were unable to make any headway, and this is after the massive sabotage that operations that had happened inside, the assassinations, etc. It showed that Hezbollah's special forces and ground troops were super prepared and were able to operate without command. So I think if Lavrov, one of his goals, okay, is to show up at those talks, to deprive Zelensky and Ukraine and its backers of slowing momentum, that has been achieved. The other thing he can do is sit in the room directly with the Americans that Trump has delegated to these talks, okay, presuming that they're MAGA folks loyal to Trump and not neocons, and say, what the F are you doing? We are going to retaliate, and we're not going to take these talks seriously anymore. And you're going to lose one of your election promises, Trump, if right now you don't blast the hell out of Zelensky and give us a space to retaliate. So I think we're only going to know what's going to happen in the next days to come. Let's see what the statements are from these talks. If Lavrov got snubbed by the American team there, the Russians will go home and play another game. That's what diplomacy is. It's also part, when a war is going on, you still have to have diplomatic doors opened in order to be able to not misunderstand each other, at least. Okay. This is what he will achieve in Istanbul today, and we will see after today how the Russians will react.
Okay, I just have three fast comments. First, I think Hezbollah, they were not prepared for the ground invasion. They didn't act as we expected. And second, I think also there's a difference between what Ukrainians did and what the Russians did. The Russians, last time when they retaliated, they bombed cities, while what Ukraine did yesterday was purely a military operation against military targets. And the third one, and the last one, you talked about Ortega's. I think she resigned, or they forced her to resign because she didn't accomplish what they did. I think the guy that will come, or the woman that will come to rule Lebanon after Ortega's, he or she will be tougher, because for them, the Americans, يعني Hezbollah is not dismantled fully, and Ortega's failed this job. They will get a tougher person to rule Lebanon.
So, Sharmeen mentioned this shakeup of the Trump administration where Morgan Ortagus and others were removed or are to be replaced. And we don't know what it means yet. You know, Kareem's saying someone newer, someone harsher may come on. But just to remind our viewers who Morgan Ortagus is, she is the one who shook hands with the Lebanese president wearing a Star of David ring, and also who thanked Israel for weakening Hezbollah straight from the Lebanese presidential palace. Israel is worried that this shakeup, signifies a policy shift, and that it's bad news for Israel. That's what Channel 14 said, as well as other reports. So it's yet to be seen, who comes. I do agree that Morgan Ortagus has so far, failed to achieve what has been she's been tasked with. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what this shakeup means when it comes to the Iran talks, when it comes to Ukraine, and of course when it comes to Gaza. We're going to talk about Iran and the Gaza negotiations.
So if it was just Ortega's, Kareem, I could say that is open to interpretation. We'll find out, depending on who comes next, what this means. Okay, but it wasn't just Ortega's; it was two absolute right-wing hawks who were also axed alongside her. All right, he wants to get rid of the neocons and bring in MAGA. In his mind, they're trusted officials. They're people who worship at the altar of Trump. All right, and see his vision. It may not be consistent across the board. It's not in international relations, political science. You wouldn't be able to. There'd be no theory of Trumpism because it's just all over the place, right? But people who will march to his tune exactly and not try to undermine him. So when you say Ortega's wasn't able to achieve her goals, means nothing. Nobody can achieve those goals to disarm Hezbollah. The state knows this. That's not a failing. That's just par for the course, So I do think, again, looking at these firings or resignations in context, there are several things happening because a lot of this reflects Iran's the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks. Ortegas was very prominent on the Lebanese scene, but the other two, and one of them, the one who worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, was the Iran man at the National Security Council. So several things have happened. Trump, or the White House, freezes new Iran sanctions. Okay, just out of the blue. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt has reportedly ordered a pause on all new sanctions activity toward Iran, which doesn't mean there aren't sanctions on Iran or that they've removed them. It just means they're stalling, putting these things into full effect, or maybe providing a window. This is reported by the Wall Street Journal, and the directive was sent by the White House to senior officials at the National Security Council and the Department of Treasury and the Department of State, with coordination across all agencies that manage Iran-related policy. Now, this happens, which seems to suggest that this is maybe a Trump goodwill gesture to the Iranians, potentially, correct? Doesn't seem to be any other possible reason. The U.S.-Iran nuclear talks seem to be chugging along a little bit, marginally, at least for now, more successfully than Ukraine peace talks or Gaza ceasefire. Okay. But at the same time, the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog agency that that has established the protocol for Iranian inspections, etc., basically the international body that oversees nuclear proliferation and cooperation. It issues the leader of the IAEA, the director, issues a report claiming that Iran was in non-compliance with its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, you're going, oh, Iran broke a rule. No, it didn't. This report is from 3 decades ago, from something everybody knows, that in 2003, Iran was on whether they would have a nuclear weapons or not. We're maybe looking into it, maybe making some designs. We don't know. But the point is, in 2003, when this was disclosed, Iran then decided to blatantly state for domestic and foreign audiences that actually weaponization of their nuclear energy program was no longer on the agenda. Not only was it not on the agenda, it was forbidden by the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. Okay. And then for 3 decades, we've had the most, the most invasive inspections program that the IAEA has ever conducted in any country at any time ever. This report comes out as the US and Iran are sitting in nuclear negotiations. So as Trump tries to lessen some of the pressures on Iran, the pro-Israel neocon side is recycling old Israeli faked documents. The Iranians came out and made public statements about this immediately, saying that the IAEA report was issued with political objectives and through pressures, and is based in part on forged Israeli documents. These are long ago documents, and goes beyond the IAEA's mandate. So you see what's happening on the Iran-US talks is also now happening on the Ukraine peace talks and is happening on Gaza ceasefire talks. Really, when it comes down to this, because the Americans are deeply involved in all three, okay? They're basically championing these talks or are the main negotiator on one side. Really, when it comes down to it, is a fight inside the U.S., a war inside the U.S. on foreign policy. Neocons versus MAGA. Let's see who wins.
Cool. So, yeah, I mean, I think I saw earlier, like a while ago, that an Iranian official told Reuters, not that I ever trust Reuters on Iran, but an Iranian official told Reuters that Iran will respond negatively to the latest proposal, the U.S. proposal that was handed over to Iran by Oman. And we'll see what happens, because like you said, is it Israel's demands for Iran that are going to make it through, or is it the U.S.? Does the U.S. really want a deal? Because if the U.S. really wants a deal, the U.S. can make a deal. If the U.S. doesn't want a deal, it will go with the purely Israeli demand of zero enrichment allowed. Anyway, I think that before we get into ceasefire negotiations on Gaza, I just wanted to zoom in for a minute and talk about the U.S.-Israeli aid mechanism that is being described by UN officials and many others as death traps. So then we can zoom back out to the to the Gaza talks. But I just want to say that since the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, started operating on 27 May, at least 75 Palestinians have been killed trying to seek aid, and over 400 have been wounded. And, this is, yesterday we had a massacre. Dozens were massacred in Rafah yesterday at one of these aid distribution sites, as they call them. Another crowd of starving Palestinians were gunned down, while just trying to survive. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because of what was spun around it, not just what happened. These were distribution points that they were fired at both in the Netzarim corridor and in Rafah, but the bigger massacre took place in Rafah. And basically, we have eyewitness accounts. We have by Doctors Without Borders. We have the footage, bodies lying motionless on the ground. We have, footage of people scrambling before they were even massacred and being shot at, and not in a crossfire, but by Israeli forces. And they were targeted several times. And, what do we get in response? This tired propaganda playbook, which is Israel, this time, I'm not even kidding you guys, literally flat out denied that any massacres happened. They said there was nothing of the sort happened. They literally said that did not happen, even though we have, forget the Gaza Health Ministry. Oh, that's the Hamas government. We can't trust them. We had Victoria Rose, who's a U.S. plastic surgeon, British plastic surgeon volunteering in Gaza, who did a public press conference and said how many bodies arrived at Nasser Hospital from this. This was the Israeli forces. You had Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, flat out denying the massacres, saying that, BBC and CNN reported this too accurately. and too early. He was horrified that the BBC and CNN reported that Israel opened fire on these starving aid seekers, basically. And he cried, there's no one to talk to about this. Like, no one's listening to us. Israel's isolated and Israel's not being run properly. He's just horrified that mainstream was, reporting the truth, basically. And then the bots came in, and these pro-Israel accounts continued to claim that it never happened and that somehow Hamas did it. Hamas set up a fake GHF page and told them to go out and get aid just so that they could shoot them and then take the aid themselves, for example. So this lie has been debunked, and the Israeli army even put out a video claiming that, see, this is the video, and look at how Palestinians are opening fire on each other, and we had nothing to do with it. Well, that video was also debunked by a bunch of people because that video wasn't from Rafah, it was from Khan Yunis, and guess what it did show? It showed Israeli-backed gangs stealing aid.
We talked about this in the last podcast about this ISIS-linked fellow who is basically, a leader of these gangs that are completely backed by the Israelis, who are going in there and looting. They're wearing some kind of humanitarian organization uniform, right? As though they're there to protect aid coming in, but then they're taking the aid. And in this case, in the video that was debunked that you're talking about in Khan Yunis, civilians tried to retrieve some of the stolen aid while the gang, operating under Israeli drone surveillance, fired into the air. And we talked about how even if the Israelis allow aid in because they're forced to, you have a U.S.-Israeli NGO/mercenary/military operation that will have all the aid within its hands and control. And then on the other side, you have Israel having backed these ISIS-like gangs who hate Hamas, right? Who will steal the aid that comes in and basically ensures that aid doesn't get to the recipients that need it most.
Yeah, exactly. What Israel's doing here is not only massacring civilians at aid sites and humiliating them and annihilating them, but they're actively destabilizing Gaza through this aid mechanism and through these gangs. And it's not just Yasser Abu Shabab. They're operating all across the strip. Yasser Abu Shabab is in the south. You have the north, the central, the south. And they boast about this chaos that they are engineering in their media because they're strengthening these bandits. They give them air cover. They loot aid, sowing chaos, terrorizing civilians. And then if Hamas executes one of them, because that's what the Interior Ministry has been tasked to do, it will be like, oh, look, they're killing civilians because they want aid.
No, they're killing
Right.
ISIS-linked Israeli mercenaries.
Right. So the whole point here is to undermine security and fracture the people's relationship to the resistance, fracture the resistance, turn people against each other. I want to say something about this mechanism. I'm not here to tell you that nobody's getting aid. Some people are getting aid out of this, but it's completely survival of the fittest. This has been described by the UN as literally, first of all, no, before I tell you about that, it's heart-wrenching because it's like a game of you walk for miles and you don't know if you're going to come back with aid or not. And you don't even know if you're going to come back at all. Because this area, the distribution area, if you manage to reach it, is being described as an area where starving civilians are supposed to race for aid that's been laid out in a pit. So if you're older, if you're not so physically fit, if you're, you know what I mean? If you don't get there on time, imagine how people will start fighting.
No, but then they've become killing fields because
Exactly.
Israel loves that they're males, right? Because, they're the ones who are going to get the food by and large, right? If you look at the crowds, they're killing potential Hamas members of the future, right? They just opening fire. And these are areas that are secured ostensibly by this U.S.-Israeli NGO.
That's the thing, yeah. It's like every time anything of the sort happens, any armed exchange happens, they say Hamas is like shooting whatever. And it's like, well, Israel will not let Hamas loot the aid because it will bomb them, right? So don't come and tell me, like you said, these areas are secured by Israel, right?
Same argument that Hamas is hiding in in homes and human shielding among civilians. Basically, Israel used that excuse to bomb every hospital in Gaza, every school, every university, every institution, thousands and thousands of residential buildings, parks, beaches, you name it, because Hamas is hiding there. Literally, how stupid are you going to be for how long before you realize who to believe and who not to believe? Hamas stealing aid is not at all Hamas's goal here.
No, and if people want, if members of the armed brigade of Hamas want aid, I mean, they're going to get some aid. I mean, but it's not that they're holding civilians hostage or that they will kill their own people to get that aid. I'm sure they have someone, even if 70% of Gaza has turned against Hamas, they have someone who's going to pass them aid.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the video that you talked about that was released by the Israeli army. We can see that the camera is following these guys and the camera is moving. And we are all sure and certain that if this was not a guy that was backed by Israel or even an Israeli or American soldier, we can 100% say that Israel will bomb this place and kill like 20 people and say, oh, there was a member of Hamas doing this. So their way of operating this war debunks the video.
Like showing the video basically debunks the video because they would have bombed any, I mean, the point of the video was to show, look, Palestinians are fighting themselves. We have nothing to do with it. Like whether they said it was Hamas or not, we weren't the ones opening fire,
I
So-
mean, let's say if Trump appears to be committed to making some headway in nuclear talks with Iran, and in Ukraine peace talks with the Russians, he seems far away from being interested in Gaza ceasefire talks because the terms of this deal, I mean, when I look at the terms of this deal, I think the U.S. should never be a mediator for any peace negotiations in any diplomatic talks anywhere forevermore. They're so bad. When was the last time the U.S. did a deal that it actually abided by? I mean, we talk a lot about, the Russians kind of coined this term that we mention on the Cradle a lot, which is, the U.S.'s agreement incapable. And it is such a suitable phrase to describe how the Americans operate on any deals they strike anywhere.
Don't you think that currently and previously, and the Americans are the ones who start and end the wars?
No, that's if they actually want to stop a war, they basically stop arming both sides. Like let's that's kind of how it goes. All right. They don't. If a war's not stopping, it's because the Americans aren't doing their utmost.
It's because they don't want to stop it.
They don't want to. But I mean, I just want to mention for those of you who are just like, oh, another ceasefire deal. Steve Witkoff is talking to this, and oh, did Hamas reject it again? Because it's always portrayed as Hamas rejecting talks. Where actually, it's kind of like Israel saying, "Give me your firstborn, so I can cut him up and eat him." And Hamas said no to that. Hamas rejected the offer. That's where we're getting, because the previous ceasefire deal, which Trump insisted on before he came into the White House, okay, the previous ceasefire deal signed on January 17th and violated by Israel within 6 weeks, right, in early March, included a major withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, from all the main corridors, right? And then in a second phase and third phase, there'd be even more withdrawals, but like really major Israeli troop withdrawal. And it happened within like 24, 48 hours, right? Easy peasy. The delivery of hundreds of trucks a day of food, medicine, fuel, aid supplies, reconstruction of Gaza, it mandated, Hamas said, governance of Gaza can be put in other people's hands. Like, we're okay with that. They agreed to that. And importantly, the U.S. was there as a guarantor that Israel would support the ceasefire, would abide by the ceasefire. Within 6 weeks, that was over. Netanyahu played Trump again, okay, as he always does.
But the funny thing is, Karim over the weekend was like, there's a deal. Trump means business. And Trump said that within 24 hours, we're going to have a really good announcement about Gaza. And I think Netanyahu played Trump. I mean, if Trump so confidently said 24 hours and we'll have something and nothing happened.
They're just lying to him. I mean, Witkoff, is Witkoff a Zionist? Because
yes,
on this one, well, I know he's Jewish, but is he like a full-on Zionist or is he MAGA? Here's my question, because on this one, Witkoff is diddling Trump. All right, because after that January 17th ceasefire that, listed all these things that are very logical. If you want a ceasefire, you have to withdraw your troops. You have to allow for reconstruction. You have to bring in aid to the civilian populations. And you have to guarantee that. The major power that's supplying arms to one side has to be the guarantor of peace. Nothing like that in deal 2. In deal 2, all right, I mean, just some examples. Hamas initially proposed a 90-day ceasefire. Israel goes, nah, 60 days. Okay. 60 days. Hamas says, okay. There's no automatic extension of the ceasefire. Israel refuses that. Okay. What Hamas, what Palestinians, what the world wants is a permanent ceasefire, not a temporary one. Okay. In this case, the Israelis can attack Gaza whenever they want. There's no U.S. guarantees whatsoever for the continuation of a ceasefire, for the continuation of peace. They talk about language like good faith, which means nothing because the preamble to the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal of 2015, was all about goodwill. It was literally all about goodwill. Didn't happen. There's no Trump guarantee. There's no enforcement mechanism. There's no guarantee of Israeli military withdrawal. Israel wants its captives back within 7 days. I think basically, right? Most of them within a 2-day period. Within 7 days of the 60-day ceasefire.
So that they can resume way before the 60 days are up.
So they can resume in week 2, basically. Whereas Hamas says we'll do half on day 1 and we'll do half on
like day 55 or something. I don't remember.
Yeah, at the end of the 60-day period, which gives them some leverage, right? To ensure that the ceasefire continues, because Trump's not going to do that. There is, like I said, no Israeli withdrawal to the prior to March 2 lines. The Israelis might redeploy within Gaza, not out of Gaza, redeploy within Gaza from time to time during these 60 days. There's very loose language. So nothing is certain, okay, in this. There's very vague language. So whereas in the first agreement, there was, it said that X amount of food trucks would enter with food, fuel, medicine, etc. In this case, it says, in the new Witkoff deal, it says aid would enter immediately, and the UN and Red Crescent would be involved with distribution. It makes no mention of fuel. It makes no mention of construction materials. It makes no mention of the lifting of the siege on Gaza. There's no clarity on this, the U.S. Israeli mercenary NGO and its involvement in these, whether they will take over from the UN or never actually allow the UN to operate. For instance, another problem here is, imagine in the first deal you had complete cessation of all Israeli military activities, including a total ban on aerial and recon activity for 90 days, right? In this case, Israel will pause its surveillance activities for 10 to 12 hours a day. It will never stop it. During the entire ceasefire period, will never stop these activities. You mentioned something earlier. The Hamas says we were willing to hand over Gaza's administration an independent Palestinian technocratic body, and Israel rejected this.
Yeah, to just the interesting thing, I mean, is this clause about Hamas stepping down from power was in a previous draft that Witkoff and Netanyahu removed. So Witkoff and Netanyahu removed the clause about Hamas relinquishing power, and Hamas reinserted it in this response. And this response, which was not a no to the Witkoff proposal, but a yes, but. So Hamas puts the clause back in. Hamas is the one pushing for political transition, and somehow it gets labeled as unacceptable because Israel and the U.S. do not want to end the war. They don't want Palestinians running Gaza. Right? Yeah. And they want to erase Gaza to rebuild it the way they want. That's how I see it. I mean, they want to take it, right?
Yeah. I mean, the point is, Steve Witkoff is playing you. He's playing you. He's diddling you on the Gaza ceasefire. And the fact is, whatever dumb deal is struck, and honestly, I get that Hamas and Palestinian factions are under a lot of pressure from civilian populations, etc. But you can't hand over your firstborn to the enemy who wants to cut it up and eat it. Okay? You can't do that kind of deal. And Hamas should have said no. It should have said nothing less than the first ceasefire agreement. And because they kept negotiating, these Qataris, I'm sorry, the Qataris and the Egyptians, they keep pushing them, urging them. Why? You have never gotten a deal with the Israelis, ever, 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 from Oslo onwards, okay? never gotten a deal that the Israelis have abided by. And guess what? The Americans were guarantors for each and every one of these deals. Literally blow the Americans out of any ceasefire negotiations anywhere and peace negotiations because they simply don't know how. They don't understand peace.
And the U.S. was also behind the Lebanon deal. And a Hamas official told, I forgot which publication it was, like, we don't want the Lebanon situation in Gaza. We don't want to get bombed whenever Israel feels like it.
They did well. They saw what happened because the Lebanese signed the ceasefire deal before Hamas did, right? And so Hamas got a little window as to how easily Israel will violate a deal with a much bigger non-state actor like Hezbollah in the mix, right? And so they ended up getting themselves a better deal with Gaza. And it was a decent deal. But Israeli violated it nonetheless. And Trump didn't say, hey, hang on, I really don't want this. He got a full war back. I think he understands the insidiousness of Netanyahu and his American minions in a way he didn't understand when he came to the White House. You know, you live and you learn. I'm not giving Trump credit. Don't get me wrong. I don't think any of these things are at all important to him except for as a trophy, basically, because he's got a huge ego and he wants to score wins. He wants to parade around wins. He wants to chest thump. Look what I did that Biden couldn't do. So, no credit to Trump here. But if he wants those ego boosts, he's going to have to put some real skin in the game. And Steve Witkoff is absolutely not the guy to be doing the Gaza ceasefire.
I mean, we're waiting. I want to get Karim's thoughts because Karim feels that there may be a deal in the next 2 weeks. I mean, just again, Hamas, U.S. and Israel trying to control the optics of this deal, calling it unacceptable when Hamas is just pushing for governance transfer, long-term truce, putting the ball in Israel's court. Once again, Karim, what makes you say that we have gotten closer to a deal?
Hello, we talked about this the previous episode.
And does it matter what the deal is to you? I mean, any deal is okay, or does
I
it
want the
matter?
suffer to end, Charmaine, because to be honest, for me, we already lost the war in Lebanon and Syria and in Palestine. Before 7 October, the area of Israel has been expanded since then, and this tells me who lost and who won the war. Now they took part of Lebanon, they took part of Gaza, and they took part of Syria. So I think fighting now should end. There's no idea of fighting. And Hezbollah was the weakest point, and it led to the fall of Syria and what's happening now in Lebanon. So why I think? Because we know since years and years on, everything that happens in the region, there's a huge propaganda campaign before it, and now I can see and feel the propaganda campaign against Netanyahu. And they don't need him, not because to end the suffering in Gaza, because the PR of Israel that was built since 1948 has been heavily damaged, and this is the only exit for the Israelis, because we saw what happened, for instance, yesterday in the Champions League. Stop the Gaza genocide and the flags of Palestine there. I don't think the Americans or the Europeans or even the Israelis are happy with what happened and what happened in Eurovision and what's happening to Israeli tourists.
I understand that, but Karim, the deal that is on the table right now is a deal that will not end the war. It's
Yes, she asked me about why do you think the war might end in 2 weeks? I'm answering.
I know, but if it's based on this deal, the war doesn't end. There's some headlines that there's a ceasefire in Gaza and the war is over, but the war doesn't end. It's literally like what we continue to see in Lebanon, what we continue to see in Gaza.
I understood. I can answer. It's very easy. So till now, the war between Japan and Russia has never ended since World War II. The war between Pakistan and India has never ended. The war between Armenia and Azerbaijan has never ended. So there will be a ceasefire, and there might be a war after several years. But
I'm talking about a war after a week.
You're talking about that, yeah. I don't see that. I think they will end the war.
So you think the U.S. wants to end it?
Whatever the deal is, it will stop.
Did you not listen to the terms of the deal that I recited? Like, I literally said there's no end to the war. There's no new negotiations. Israel can do whatever it wants. There's no automatic renewal of a ceasefire term. Basically, and what did Netanyahu said? Netanyahu said after this came out that we will continue in Gaza until we eradicate Hamas, which means there's no ceasefire, even if every headline
Yeah,
across the world says there's a deal.
Israel said the same in 2026, and they didn't remove 2006. Yeah, and they didn't remove Hezbollah. It's just worse.
No,
Sharmi.
no, Karim, the situation has changed dramatically since then. We're talking about a Netanyahu, the most right-wing government in Israel's history, that is talking about Amalek and is showing the world, despite the censure from every corner, that they're proceeding with a genocide and want to eliminate every Palestinian from Gaza. That didn't exist then. They still pretended that they were a liberal democracy. That pretense has gone. We're not talking about 2006. We're talking about Netanyahu after a ceasefire deal saying, "Yep, great ceasefire, but we're going to have to continue to bomb Gaza." That's not a deal.
So if I could get on board with what you're saying, if you mean like it might be temporary, but it will happen, like some
They
kind
can
of thing.
say whatever they want. That when the United States take that decision to end the war, nobody will bomb Gaza.
I know. No, I agree with you, of course. But I'm just saying, like, why would they want to end it so soon?
They don't want to end it. I didn't say that. I said the propaganda that's being held against Netanyahu in the world tells me that they are preparing for something for Netanyahu. And now Olmert is everywhere on CNN, on BBC, on social media. Maybe they are preparing Olmert. That's how I see it. If I was an Israeli, I want an exit. Somebody now will comment, don't say that. If I want an exit, I think I can bring Olmert because his speeches or his answers align perfectly with the West, with especially UK and France, and they can get him.
Well, look, we don't have time to talk about it, but like they're terrified of this push for recognizing Palestinian statehood, even if it.
And Olmert said, "I am a."
Happened at the General Assembly in, is it June or July? There's a Saudi-French
Saudi summit, yeah.
summit to get recognition of Palestine. Though at the same time, the agenda is to force normalization, like all the General Assembly to sign on to equal, right? So, which, I think it's just theater.
And I want to mention something before. So we said it also previously, I think 2 months ago. I said on the podcast that a huge mistake will occur if Hamas handed the American captive, and they did. Now they are receiving the consequences of this, and Arabs usually are very easily deceived by the West. And I can't recall a deal, a political deal that was signed between the West or any Arab country since the 20s, not in recent years, that benefited the Arab world. And Hamas also did the same mistake. They handed over this guy, and now there is no leverage over Trump or over the Americans.
He
Not
was
just the
very
Arabs.
valuable,
It
though.
was the Minsk agreement. It was the promise to the Russians not to expand NATO eastward. It was the 2015 Iranian nuclear, the JCPOA agreement. What I'm saying is the Americans are agreement incapable and should never be party to any such negotiation because they deal entirely in bad faith. Now, my question is, when this fails, when the Iran nuclear talks fail, when Russia, Ukraine peace talks fail, will we be looking to players like China, the BRICS as an organization, India, Turkey, others to come in with deals because people want an end to this, right? People do want, and globally they want it. And so I think, you know, everyone looks fondly at the Chinese brokered Saudi Iran deal. Nobody took it too seriously. I think the reason it made headlines was like nobody even heard about this, and suddenly China brokers peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and it's not what the U.S. wanted, right? They always want to create division and enmity within regions and within countries, etc. So that was like a real loss to the Americans. At the same time, the fact that China, its number one adversary, brokered the deal made China a big player and maybe more respected in a region that the U.S. seeks so much to dominate. But maybe those are the players you need to strike peace in the world moving forward. At the same time that all these deals are happening, the neocons are talking wildly, and I don't mean just the American ones. I'm talking about like the president of France, etc. At the Singapore conference, talking wildly about like Taiwan and China and getting involved in conflict there. It's quite stunning. I mean, I really don't know what's happened to Europe. Europe is probably taken the biggest hits of any continent in the last 5 years.
Europe, they can't do anything because they handed their security to the United States since like decades.
At the
So
same time, these next 4 years, they know they can't do that. So Europe is now trying to rally together to up its defense budgets, et cetera. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister today, talked about getting ready, mobilizing for war. I mean, the European neoliberals and neocons are going all the way, regardless if Trump follows or not. And they will try to sabotage Trump's presidency in order to get their US counterparts on board. Because, like I said, when empire, we've talked about this many times, when empire collapses, it becomes a wild flailing beast. Expect more violence in the years to come as US hegemony declines. But now we're seeing Europe, Europe gunning for war, even though it has no economy anymore. And the Brits are talking about, the British government, the Labour government is talking about a water tax and being able to monitor how much water Britons are able to use in their baths, all right, while he's asking them to mobilize for war. I mean, are these people completely detached from reality? I don't know.
I agree with you that giving up the U.S. Israeli captive was a bad idea. And I agree with you that we may see other guarantors in the future. But, China brokering rapprochement, right, between Iran and Saudi is very different than something that involves Israel, because that's just like automatically the U.S., right? And when we saw the Beijing agreement.
No, they would have scuttled the Saudi-Iranian peace if they knew what was going on. I mean, the thing about that was that nobody knew what was going on.
Right, but something like Gaza, I mean, China has like zero power as far as I'm
It's
concerned.
not about that. It's having like a multipolar
Right, you mean like down the line?
group. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is not going to work. U.S. peace deals don't exist.
No, because as Karim said, they deceive over and over again. Like I was like, Hamas is playing it very smart. Hamas is playing it very smart. And then when Hamas released Idan Alexander, I was like, God damn. God damn. No, I mean, they're in a bad position, right?
I agree
They
100%.
have to do this gesture.
Hamas should learn from that, that you cannot trust the U.S. But also what I'm saying is, whereas Steve Witkoff seems to be playing it the way Trump wants it to be played, so far at least, on the U.S.-Iran deal, and he is not. He's playing the neocons' interest, not MAGA interest, on the Gaza ceasefire. So,
Look, I found the talks between the Palestinian factions in Beijing very interesting. And then the Beijing agreement that came out. But Fatah is the one who sabotaged that, probably on the order of Israel. I mean, even if the Palestinian
and the U.S.
even if the
Fatah are
Palestinians.
the Palestinian Authority. Just for them to know.
Yeah, the even if the Palestinians get their house in order, like, and we saw like something take off from the Beijing agreement, I mean, Israel and the U.S. will just like crap all over that. I don't, I mean, I'm waiting. The Palestinians need to get their house in order. Palestinian unity is the main
Oh,
thing
no, that's
that we
another
need. But
problem down the road.
I was
That's
saying,
not
like,
even,
let's say right now the entire world recognizes Palestine as a state along the 67 borders. What does that translate into on the ground?
I don't think we need that. That's BS. That's like talking about two states.
But Israel hates it. Why is Israel so terrified of it if it's BS?
Because listen, no matter what it is, they put up obstacles, because anything becomes one step closer to, they do not allow their narrative to be shifted whatsoever. So they will fight everything, even though it's not a fight worth having. Like if a dentist in I don't know, somewhere in a small town in California gives special discounts for support of Palestine, they will go after that dentist, even though it means nothing. And they're saying, so their narrative gatekeeping is huge. They do not want Palestine to be said, even though any General Assembly ruling on Palestine, or in this case, a two-state solution, means nothing, because the Israelis have removed systematically since Oslo any possibility of a two-state solution ever happening. They have, forget Gaza, they've divided up the West Bank. There's Jews only roads, there's Jews only this or that. The settlements in the West Bank have expanded exponentially in the last few decades since a peace deal was struck with Palestinians. There's no way for a second Palestinian state. But what the Israelis have done, this is the problem with the Israelis and Americans, the unintended consequences of this pushing so hard. Same with Zelensky and what he greenlit and colluded with yesterday. There will be unintended consequences of this. The unintended consequences of destroying the two-state solution and marginalizing all genuine Palestinian parties with grassroots support who could bring about a solution, a two-state solution, is that we are now genuinely looking at one state. In many people around the world, that 1967 border is not valid anymore because the Zionist project is a genocidal one. So why should they have any state?
Well,
And
it's valid if the right of return is enforced. Because then even the 48 will be completely like
that right of return's not even on anyone's agenda. Even Hamas is giving out. Do you know what I mean?
That's not true.
No. It's not ever discussed. It's one of those cans that are kicked down the road. What I'm saying is today, people are thinking, wait, even if you have a Palestinian state, you're going to have these genocidal swines in power.
Right.
No, Zionism has been exposed. And so 1948 now has been questioned, and it's being questioned by Americans.
Finally.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, to be honest, Seema, what was always disturbing to me is that Palestinians went with the 1967 border.
It disturbed me too, but now I'm just I would be like, oh, okay, fine, let's do the 67 because Israel's having a meltdown just at the prospect of it. Because like Karim said, they don't want to
There's only
they don't want to shrink, they want to
Yeah.
expand.
There's
But that's if it's implemented.
There's only one
You know.
possible solution to this, just like there was with apartheid South Africa, is complete dismantlement of the Zionist project, and bringing one man, one vote for all those territories in which Palestine will be reestablished.
Karim, any comments?
As an Arab, none of these things are possible because we're weak. We're the weakest we have ever been. I'm so weak I cannot even peel a banana.
She said this.
No, he was gonna say
While
that.
I was talking, we'll talk about this.
Go on.
Yeah, I
Here
want
we
to
go.
add that this can be implemented unless the Arabs stand with Palestine, because currently Egypt, the Gulf countries, Jordan, the new Syria, they all want the security of Israel. And unfortunately, my new president and prime minister, they want the security of Israel above the security of the Lebanese people. So unless this is changed also, dismantling the Zionist regime will not benefit the Palestinians, because the mentality of the Arab rulers will also expand to Palestine. And Palestine, although maybe technically will be freed from the Zionists, but it will not be really free.
I don't think you need the Arab leaders. The fact is the Arab leaders they're selected leaders, right? They're not elected. None of them are elected, the ones you're talking about. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to try to set things right in the world, you have to resist bad governance. And that's what Palestinians are doing. I'm so tired of people waiting for the Arabs to come and
but
help.
But he's right that they do need Arab political backing. Although if the Palestinians need to get their house in order, right? I mean, if the PA alone is a problem, but the Arabs need to have, there needs to be some semblance. And if they're serious about their, Palestinian state backing, I mean, we saw them get blocked from going to the West Bank. That's embarrassing, not just for the PA, because Israel decides who comes in and out of the West Bank. That's embarrassing for the Arabs. The Arabs could not even visit the Arabs delegations, right? Like the UAE, Egypt, who was it? Saudi, wasn't it also Qatar? They were blocked from visiting.
To the Israelis. They think they're so important with these
Blocked
partnerships.
from visiting Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank.
So the funny part is that the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia was in Damascus, and he was going to Ramallah via airplane, and he was wanted to give this as a gift for the Israelis, that I flew from Damascus to Ramallah and above the Israeli territory, and then the Israelis told him no. So just to let you know how the mentality is. And last comment over what Sharmeen said. Hopefully this is the case, Sharmeen, but currently we live in a world that is so interconnected. You can't take a decision alone. Yani, for instance, even the United States, if it wants to go to a war or kill like another few thousand people in other places, they need allies. They need the UK. They need the
Whatever
Europeans. So
happens now moving forward, in the short term, not, but in the medium term, Israel is going to collapse because, like I said, it stands on two legs. One is its mythology about victimhood, and that has been shattered so dramatically. There's no one seeing it. Now, wait. And the other is Jews moving there, and Israel's economy has taken hits. What you're going to see after the Gaza war is the militarization of Israel's society, because if Netanyahu and his coalition persists, those are thugs. These are thugs who are in charge of national security, okay, and settlement activity. You are going to see, as 3 former Israeli prime ministers, deep staters, have said, a civil war in Israel. Israel will fail to, will collapse eventually. You don't need the Arabs.
okay, Sharmi, I agree with you 100%. Israel will fail. In 1 month, 2 months, 2 years, 10 years, 15 years, it will fail. But what the problem is, if Israel fails and there is no pan-Arabism or there is no resistance, what will happen?
It'll get swallowed by the UAE.
100%. Thank you, Sima. So what's the difference of Palestine swallowed by UAE or Israel? For me, there is no difference. I want Arabs, not only the Palestinians, to have a real states, to innovate, to manufacture, and to do many stuff. For instance, now there is no Israel or Morocco. But does anybody respect Morocco? Does anybody respect now the occupied Iraq?
No.
I think it's easier for Israel to vanish than it is for Palestinians to get their act together. I really do. That's their problem in the future. Okay. What I'm saying right now, the abomination, okay, the slap in the face of universal humanity is Israel. That carbuncle needs to end, and then let Palestinians do whatever they want to get, if they want to go under American sponsorship or Emirati sponsorship, whatever. The fact is, societies have the right to evolve based on their own steam. They will be let down by Emirati or any Egyptian or Saudi patronage, because you can't be a sovereign state with external patronage ever, ever, ever. Okay, so I'm not concerned about that. You're really rushing ahead. What I'm talking about now is the collapse of Israel, the fact that you don't need Arab state allies in order for that to happen, and that resistance exists around the world, and we're seeing solidarity where we didn't see a decade before. Yemen coming into the mix, losing Syria but gaining Yemen, arguably a much, much more powerful ally, okay, because they're actually bombing Israel all the time, whereas Syria wouldn't have been able to. Do you know what I mean? So, you have African countries in the Sahel. You have this is wonderful, the Irish MMA fighter who beat an unbeaten Israeli, and right in the ring, and shouted, "Free Palestine, free Palestine." It's just literally everything's changing. You don't need Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, Sisi, and the other frogs.
That's why I said that the West want to end the war, because of these things that.
So, I mean, we could go on and on, but on that note, we have to wrap things up. Thank you for joining us today.
Join us on Thursday again, because now we're doing 2 podcasts a week, folks.
And Karim,
To comment, because we read them. I read them 100%, and Sharmin reads them. Sima, not all of it.
oh, just the Zionists having a meltdown. They're my favorite. So thank you so much, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't. And please do follow us on social media, Twitter and Telegram at the top at the moment. So
And please don't forget to donate to our Patreon. and become a monthly subscriber so we can continue these podcasts.
Thank you, guys. Once again, I've been joined by editor and columnist for The Cradle, Sharmeen Narwani, and content creator and writer for The Cradle, Karim Shami.